Between the 1540s and the 1560s, the Mediterranean Sea witnessed a dramatic shift in power as the Ottoman Empire, under the rule of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his successors, embarked on a determined and strategic campaign to extend its influence across the region. The Ottoman Empire, already a vast and powerful entity that spanned 3 continents, saw the Mediterranean not only as a key strategic area for military dominance, but also as an essential corridor for trade, wealth, and cultural exchange. The empire's naval ambitions were a direct challenge to the long-standing maritime supremacy of the Christian European powers, particularly the Republic of Venice and the Kingdom of Spain. The Ottoman strategy was multifaceted. On one hand, they sought to secure vital trade routes that linked the East and the West. Controlling these routes meant not only economic prosperity for the empire, but also the ability to exert influence over the flow of goods, such as spices, silk, and other valuable commodities that were in high demand in Europe. On the other hand, the Ottomans aimed to project their military power across the Mediterranean, turning it into an Ottoman lake where their galleys could move freely, unchecked by European fleets. This strategy included the conquest of key islands and coastal cities, which served both as military outposts and as centers for commerce and administration. As the Ottoman navy grew in strength, so too did the frequency and intensity of their engagements with European forces. The Mediterranean became a theater of constant naval warfare, with numerous skirmishes, raids, and full-scale battles taking place. The Ottomans, with their state-of-the-art galleys and well-trained sailors, often had the upper hand in these encounters. They employed tactics that combined speed, surprise, and overwhelming force, catching many European fleets off guard. Coastal cities in southern Europe, particularly those in Italy and Spain, lived in constant fear of Ottoman raids, which could strike at any time, bringing devastation and slavery. One of the key elements of the Ottoman naval strategy was the use of corsairs, or pirates, who operated under the empire's protection. These corsairs, based in strongholds like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, raided European ships and coastal settlements, capturing goods and taking captives who were often sold into slavery. The most famous of these corsairs was Barbarossa, Hayreddin Pasha, who became the admiral of the Ottoman fleet and led many successful campaigns against the European powers. The activities of these corsairs added another layer of threat to the Mediterranean, making it a perilous place for European merchants and travelers. Despite numerous attempts by European powers to curb Ottoman expansion, the empire continued to make significant gains. The fall of Cyprus in 1570, after a brutal campaign, was one of the most significant Ottoman victories of this period. Cyprus had been a Venetian stronghold, and its loss was a severe blow to Christian Europe. The conquest of Cyprus not only gave the Ottomans a strategic base in the eastern Mediterranean, but also sent a clear message to Europe about the growing might of the Ottoman Empire. The threat posed by the Ottomans during these decades was not just military, but also psychological. European rulers and their subjects became increasingly aware of the possibility that the Ottomans could extend their reach even further into Europe. The fear of Ottoman invasion and the spread of Islam into Christian lands led to a sense of urgency among European powers to unite against a common enemy. This period of Ottoman expansion set the stage for the eventual formation of the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states led by Pope Pius V, which sought to challenge Ottoman dominance in the Mediterranean. In summary, the period from the 1540s to the 1560s was marked by the aggressive and strategic expansion of Ottoman naval power across the Mediterranean. The empire's efforts to control key trade routes, conquer strategic territories, and challenge the naval supremacy of Europe created an atmosphere of constant conflict and tension. This relentless Ottoman push into the Mediterranean not only disrupted the balance of power in the region, but also paved the way for one of the most significant naval battles in history, the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, where the Holy League would confront the full might of the Ottoman fleet in a bid to protect Christian Europe from further encroachment.
The year 1566 marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Ottoman Empire, with the death of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a ruler whose reign had not only expanded the empire's borders, but also solidified its status as one of the most powerful states in the world. Suleiman's rule, which spanned nearly 5 decades, was characterized by both military conquests and significant internal reforms that shaped the cultural, legal, and administrative foundations of the empire. His passing left an indelible impact on the empire, ushering in a period of transition under the leadership of his son, Selim II, who would inherit both the responsibilities of the empire and the legacy of one of history's most illustrious rulers. Suleiman the Magnificent was, by all accounts, a sultan of extraordinary abilities. He ascended the throne in 1520 and quickly set about expanding the empire's territories. Under his leadership, the Ottomans pushed deep into Europe, capturing key territories such as Belgrade in 1521 and, most famously, laying siege to Vienna in 1529, which, though unsuccessful, sent shockwaves throughout Christendom. Suleiman also extended Ottoman control over large parts of the Middle East and North Africa, securing the empire's dominance over vital trade routes and strategic locations. His reign was not only about territorial expansion, but also about strengthening the empire's internal structure. Suleiman was a great patron of the arts and architecture, commissioning the construction of some of the most iconic structures in Istanbul, including the Süleymaniye Mosque, which still stands today as a testament to his reign. Moreover, Suleiman was known as Kanuni, or the lawgiver, for his extensive legal reforms. He overhauled the empire's legal system, harmonizing the existing Ottoman laws with Islamic law, Sharia, and creating a more unified and just legal code. His reforms covered everything from criminal law to the rights of non-Muslim subjects, reflecting his vision of an empire that was not only powerful, but also just and inclusive. Suleiman's legal and administrative reforms helped to centralize the empire's governance, reducing the power of local authorities and ensuring that the sultan's authority was felt throughout the empire. His reign also saw a flourishing of culture, with advancements in literature, science, and the arts, making the Ottoman Empire a center of intellectual and cultural achievement during the 16th century. However, as with all great rulers, Suleiman's life came to an end. His death occurred during a military campaign in Hungary, at the siege of Szigetvar, as he continued to press the empire's influence into Central Europe. Despite his advanced age and declining health, Suleiman insisted on leading his army, a testament to his dedication to the empire's expansionist policies. When he died in his tent on September 6, 1566, the news was initially kept secret to prevent any disruption in the military operations and to ensure a smooth transition of power. His death, under such circumstances, added a dramatic end to the life of a ruler who had been at the helm of the empire during its golden age. With Suleiman's death, the question of succession loomed large. His chosen successor was his son, Selim II, a prince who had lived much of his life in the shadow of his father's towering legacy. Unlike his father, Selim II did not have a strong military background, nor was he known for his administrative prowess. In fact, Selim had a reputation for his indulgent lifestyle, particularly his fondness for wine, which earned him the nickname Selim the Sot. His ascension to the throne was met with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Many within the empire and among its adversaries questioned whether Selim would be able to maintain the momentum of his father's reign, or if his more passive nature would lead to a decline in the empire's fortunes. Despite the doubts, Selim II assumed the throne, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Ottoman history. Unlike Suleiman, who was deeply involved in the day-to-day governance of the empire and led his armies in person, Selim II adopted a different approach to leadership. He largely delegated the responsibilities of running the empire to his capable Grand Vizier, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, who became the de facto ruler in many respects. Sokolu was a seasoned statesman and military strategist who had served under Suleiman and was well versed in the complexities of Ottoman governance. His steady hand ensured that the empire continued to function smoothly and that its expansionist policies remained in place. Under Selim II's reign, the Ottoman Empire continued to assert its dominance in the Mediterranean, a region that had become increasingly important both strategically and economically. Selim was particularly focused on strengthening the empire's naval power, recognizing that control of the Mediterranean was crucial for maintaining the empire's influence over trade routes and for countering the naval power of European states, especially Venice and Spain. The most significant military campaign of Selim II's reign was the conquest of Cyprus, an island that had long been under Venetian control. Cyprus was not only strategically located but also a valuable source of revenue due to its production of sugar and other commodities. The campaign to conquer Cyprus began in 1570 and was marked by brutal fighting. The Ottomans laid siege to the island's major cities, including Nicosia and Famagusta, with the latter holding out for nearly a year before finally falling to the Ottoman forces in August 1571. The conquest of Cyprus was a major victory for Selim II and solidified Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean. However, the brutality of the campaign, particularly the massacre of the Venetian defenders of Famagusta, sparked outrage in Europe and contributed to the formation of the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states led by Pope Pius V, which would soon challenge Ottoman naval supremacy. Selim II's reign, while often overshadowed by the achievements of his father, was crucial in maintaining the Ottoman Empire's position as a dominant power in the Mediterranean. Although Selim was not the warrior sultan that Suleiman had been, his strategic focus on naval power and his reliance on skilled administrators like Sokollu Mehmed Pasha ensured that the empire remained strong and capable of defending its interests. The continued expansion under Selim's rule, particularly in the Mediterranean, kept the Ottomans at the forefront of European geopolitics and set the stage for the epic naval confrontation at Lepanto in 1571, one of the largest and most significant naval battles of the early modern period. In conclusion, the death of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566 marked the end of an era, but the legacy of his reign continued to influence the Ottoman Empire under his son, Selim II. While Selim's leadership style and priorities differed significantly from those of his father, he managed to sustain the empire's expansionist momentum, particularly in the Mediterranean, where the Ottomans achieved significant victories such as the conquest of Cyprus. Selim's reliance on experienced advisors and his focus on naval power allowed the empire to remain a formidable force, even as it faced new challenges from a resurgent Europe. The transition from Suleiman to Selim was a moment of significant change, but it also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of the Ottoman state, which continued to thrive despite the loss of one of its greatest leaders.
In the late 1560s, the Mediterranean region was a powder keg of political and military tensions, with the Ottoman Empire aggressively expanding its influence under the leadership of Sultan Selim II. One of the most critical flashpoints during this period was the island of Cyprus, a strategically important and economically valuable territory under Venetian control. The conquest of Cyprus by the Ottomans in 1569 to 1570 would not only alter the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean, but also exacerbate the already strained relations between the Ottoman Empire and the major European powers, setting the stage for one of the most significant naval confrontations in history. Cyprus had long been coveted by the Ottomans due to its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The island served as a vital stopover point for trade routes and was also known for its production of sugar, wine, and other commodities that were highly prized in Europe. For the Venetians, who had controlled Cyprus since the late 15th century, the island was a critical outpost in their commercial empire. However, as the Ottomans continued to expand their influence across the Mediterranean, Cyprus became an increasingly attractive target for conquest. By the late 1560s, the Ottomans were ready to make their move. The decision to invade Cyprus was partly driven by Selim II's desire to secure a strategic advantage over Venice and its allies, and partly by the empire's ongoing efforts to dominate the Mediterranean. The Ottomans had already demonstrated their naval prowess in previous campaigns, and they believed that the conquest of Cyprus would not only weaken Venice, but also solidify Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean, giving them a critical edge in their struggle against European powers. The invasion of Cyprus began in the summer of 1570, with a massive Ottoman fleet setting sail from Constantinople. The fleet was commanded by Lala Mustafa Pasha, a seasoned military leader who had been tasked with leading the campaign. The Ottomans landed on the island in July 1570 and quickly laid siege to the capital city, Nicosia. Despite the efforts of the Venetian defenders, who were heavily outnumbered, the city fell to the Ottomans after just a few weeks of intense fighting. The fall of Nicosia was marked by a brutal massacre, with thousands of the city's inhabitants killed or enslaved by the victorious Ottoman forces. Following the capture of Nicosia, the Ottomans turned their attention to the fortified city of Famagusta, the last major Venetian stronghold on the island. The siege of Famagusta would become one of the most infamous episodes in the conflict between the Ottomans and the Venetians. The siege began in September 1570 and lasted nearly a year, with the Venetian defenders putting up a fierce resistance despite being outnumbered and cut off from reinforcements. The city was commanded by Marcantonio Brigadin, a Venetian nobleman who became a symbol of Venetian resolve and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. As the siege dragged on, the conditions inside Famagusta became increasingly dire. The defenders suffered from shortages of food, water, and ammunition, while the Ottomans continued to press their attack with relentless bombardments and assaults. Despite the desperate situation, Brigadin and his men refused to surrender, hoping against hope that a Venetian relief force would arrive to lift the siege. However, the expected reinforcements never came, and by August 1571, the situation had become untenable. Realizing that further resistance was futile, Brigadin eventually negotiated a surrender with Lala Mustafa Pasha, who promised to spare the lives of the defenders and allow them safe passage back to Venice. However, once the Ottomans entered the city, the terms of the surrender were brutally violated. Brigadin was seized, tortured, and eventually flayed alive, while many of the surviving defenders were either executed or sold into slavery. The fall of Famagusta marked the complete Ottoman conquest of Cyprus and the end of Venetian rule on the island. The conquest of Cyprus had far-reaching consequences for both the Ottoman Empire and Europe. For the Ottomans, the acquisition of Cyprus was a significant strategic victory that strengthened their hold over the eastern Mediterranean and further consolidated their position as the dominant naval power in the region. The island became an important base for Ottoman naval operations, allowing them to project their power more effectively across the Mediterranean. However, the brutality of the campaign, particularly the massacre at Nicosia and the horrific treatment of Brigadin and the defenders of Famagusta, shocked and outraged the European powers. The conquest of Cyprus was seen not just as a military defeat for Venice, but as a direct challenge to the broader Christian world. The Ottoman invasion galvanized European leaders who saw the need for a united response to the growing Ottoman threat. The fall of Cyprus played a critical role in the formation of the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states led by Pope Pius V, which included Spain, Venice, the Papal States, and several other European powers. The Holy League was determined to check Ottoman expansion and to reclaim Christian territories that had fallen under Ottoman control. The tensions between the Ottomans and the Holy League would soon culminate in the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, one of the largest and most decisive naval battles of the early modern period. In summary, the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus in 1569 to 1570 was a major turning point in the struggle for control of the Mediterranean. It not only marked the end of Venetian rule on the island, but also significantly escalated tensions between the Ottoman Empire and the European powers. The brutal and determined nature of the Ottoman campaign, coupled with the strategic importance of Cyprus, ensured that this conflict would have lasting repercussions, leading directly to the bloody confrontation at Lepanto and shaping the course of Mediterranean history for years to come.
In May 1571, as Europe found itself in the grip of a growing existential crisis, the formation of the Holy League by Pope Pius V represented a critical and dramatic response to the escalating threat posed by the Ottoman Empire. This coalition of Catholic states, comprising some of the most powerful nations in Europe at the time, was not just a military alliance, but a symbolic and spiritual crusade against what was perceived as an imminent danger to Christendom. The formation of the Holy League was a culmination of years of diplomatic efforts, religious fervor, and a shared sense of urgency among the Catholic states to defend their territories, their faith, and their very way of life from the advancing Ottoman forces. The seeds of the Holy League were sown in the broader context of the Ottoman Empire's relentless expansion across the Mediterranean. For decades, the Ottomans had been steadily consolidating their power, capturing key territories, and asserting control over vital trade routes. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 had marked the beginning of this era of Ottoman dominance, and by the mid-16th century, the empire had established itself as the preeminent power in the region. The Ottomans' formidable navy had become a symbol of their might, and their control over the eastern Mediterranean was nearly unchallenged. However, the situation reached a critical point with the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus in 1570-1571. This event was not just a military victory for the Ottomans, but a severe blow to European, particularly Venetian, pride and security. Cyprus had been under Venetian control for nearly a century, and its loss underscored the vulnerability of Christian Europe to Ottoman aggression. The brutality of the campaign, including the massacres at Nicosia and Famagusta, shocked the Christian world and highlighted the need for a coordinated and decisive response. It was clear that the Ottomans would not be content with Cyprus alone. Their ambitions extended to further consolidating their power in the Mediterranean, threatening the very heart of Europe. Pope Pius V, who had been elected in 1566, was a man of deep piety and strong convictions. He saw the Ottoman advance not just as a geopolitical threat, but as a spiritual and moral challenge to Christendom. The Pope believed that only a united Christian front could hope to resist the might of the Ottoman Empire. However, achieving such unity was no small task. Europe in the 16th century was deeply divided, not only by religious schisms such as the Protestant Reformation, but also by political rivalries between its leading powers. Spain, Venice, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, among others, often found themselves at odds, pursuing their interests and engaging in conflicts that distracted them from the growing Ottoman menace. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Pope Pius V embarked on a tireless campaign of diplomacy, seeking to bring together the Catholic states under a single banner. His efforts were rooted in the belief that the defense of Christendom was a sacred duty that transcended individual national interests. The Pope's vision was of a holy war, a crusade that would not only protect Europe from the Ottomans, but also serve as a rallying point for the Catholic faith at a time when it was under threat from both external forces and internal divisions. Central to the formation of the Holy League was the involvement of Spain and Venice, two of the most powerful Catholic states with significant naval capabilities. Spain, under King Philip II, was the leading power in Europe, with vast territories in the New World and a formidable military presence across the continent. Philip V, a staunch Catholic, shared the Pope's concerns about the Ottoman threat, particularly as the Ottomans had already made inroads into Spanish territories in North Africa. However, Philip was also engaged in a protracted conflict with the Protestant rebels in the Netherlands and was cautious about overextending his military resources. Venice, on the other hand, had a more immediate and personal stake in the conflict. The Venetian Republic had suffered directly from the Ottoman advance with the loss of Cyprus, a critical blow to its economic and maritime interests. Venice's position as a leading maritime power in the Mediterranean made it a natural leader in any naval coalition against the Ottomans. However, Venice was also wary of further antagonizing the Ottomans, with whom it had extensive trade relations, and was initially reluctant to commit to an all-out war. Pope Pius V's challenge was to persuade these powerful but cautious states to put aside their concerns and join forces in a common cause. His diplomatic efforts were characterized by persistent negotiation, appeals to religious duty, and promises of spiritual rewards. The Pope offered indulgences to those who would fight under the Holy League's banner, framing the conflict as a divinely sanctioned crusade. The religious rhetoric was powerful, invoking memories of earlier crusades against Muslim forces and appealing to the deep-seated Catholic belief in the defense of the faith. By May 1571, Pope Pius V's efforts had borne fruit. After intense negotiations, Spain, Venice, and several other Catholic states, including the Papal States, agreed to form the Holy League. The official formation of the League was a momentous event, marked by solemn ceremonies and the blessing of the fleets by the Pope himself. The alliance was not just a military pact, but a symbol of unity in the face of a common threat. The ships of the Holy League would sail under the banner of the crucifix, a potent symbol of their mission to protect Christendom. The formation of the Holy League was also a testament to the Pope's diplomatic skill and the ability of the Catholic Church to mobilize and unify disparate European powers around a common cause. The League's agreement stipulated that Spain would provide the bulk of the ships and troops, given its superior resources and naval power. Venice would contribute its experienced naval forces with their deep knowledge of the Mediterranean and its strategic importance. Other members, such as the Papal States, the Knights of Malta, and various Italian principalities, would also contribute ships, men, and resources to the cause. The military objective of the Holy League was clear: to confront and defeat the Ottoman navy, thereby halting the Ottoman advance in the Mediterranean and safeguarding the remaining Christian territories. However, the League's mission was imbued with a deeper sense of purpose. For Pope Pius V and the Catholic leaders of Europe, this was not just a battle for territory, but a struggle for the very soul of Europe. The defense of Christendom was seen as a sacred duty, and the men who took up arms in the League were often motivated by a profound sense of religious conviction. The creation of the Holy League also had significant political and strategic implications. For Spain, it provided an opportunity to assert its dominance in the Mediterranean and to counter Ottoman influence in North Africa and the Western Mediterranean. For Venice, the League was a chance to avenge the loss of Cyprus and to protect its remaining territories and trade routes. For the Papal States and other smaller members, participation in the League was a demonstration of their commitment to the defense of the faith and an opportunity to align themselves with the leading powers of Catholic Europe. The formation of the Holy League was not without its challenges. The coalition brought together states with different interests, agendas, and rivalries, and maintaining unity within the League required constant diplomatic effort. There were also logistical challenges in coordinating the various fleets, troops, and resources across different regions and command structures. However, the urgency of the situation and the shared sense of purpose helped to overcome many of these obstacles. As the Holy League prepared for its first major engagement with the Ottoman navy, there was a palpable sense of anticipation and determination among its members. The coalition represented the best hope of Christian Europe to stem the tide of Ottoman expansion and to protect the Mediterranean from falling entirely under Ottoman control. The leaders of the Holy League knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, but they were bolstered by the belief that they were fighting a just and righteous cause, one that had the blessing of God and the support of the Church. The formation of the Holy League in May 1571 marked the beginning of a new phase in the conflict between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire. It was a moment of rare unity among the Catholic states, driven by a common fear of the Ottoman threat and a shared determination to protect their faith and territories. The coalition's efforts would soon be put to the test in one of the most significant naval battles in history, the Battle of Lepanto. This battle would not only determine the fate of the Mediterranean, but also serve as a defining moment in the struggle between the Christian West and the Islamic East, a moment that would resonate throughout the centuries as a symbol of resistance, faith, and the enduring power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds.
On the early morning of October 7, 1571, the waters of the Gulf of Patras, located off the western coast of Greece, became the stage for one of the most momentous naval confrontations in history. The Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states assembled and blessed by Pope Pius V, was poised to face the formidable Ottoman fleet in a battle that would determine the balance of power in the Mediterranean. The stakes were impossibly high, and the sense of impending conflict weighed heavily on all who sailed that morning, from the seasoned commanders to the young sailors gripping their weapons with trembling hands. Commanding the Holy League's fleet was Don John of Austria, a charismatic and capable young leader whose lineage was as illustrious as it was complicated. The illegitimate son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and half-brother to King Philip II of Spain, Don John had been entrusted with the monumental task of leading this diverse and powerful coalition. Despite his relative youth, Don John was known for his strategic acumen, courage, and deep commitment to the Catholic cause. His appointment as the commander of the Holy League had been a deliberate choice, not just for his military skills, but also for his ability to inspire unity and resolve among the various factions within the coalition. The Holy League fleet that sailed into the Gulf of Patras that morning was an imposing sight. Comprising over 200 galleys, along with additional smaller vessels, the fleet was the largest and most powerful naval force that Christian Europe had assembled in generations. These galleys, sleek and deadly, were armed with rows of cannons and manned by thousands of soldiers, sailors, and rowers. The fleet represented the combined might of several Catholic powers, including Spain, Venice, and the Papal States, each contributing their best ships and crews to the cause. Flags bearing the cross of Christ fluttered in the breeze, and the ships were adorned with religious icons and symbols, reminders of the sacred mission that had brought these men together. As dawn broke over the horizon, the Holy League fleet slowly made its way into the Gulf of Patras, the sun's first light glinting off the water and the metal of the cannons. The air was thick with tension, and the only sounds were the rhythmic creaking of the ships, the splash of oars, and the murmured prayers of the men preparing for battle. Many of the sailors and soldiers spent these final moments in prayer, seeking the protection and favor of the Virgin Mary and the saints. The rosary was recited on nearly every deck, and priests moved among the men, offering blessings and last rites. The atmosphere was one of solemnity and determination, as all present understood the gravity of the situation. This was more than just a battle for territory. It was a battle for the soul of Europe, a confrontation between the Christian West and the Islamic East that would resonate far beyond the waters of the Gulf of Patras. Opposing them, further inside the Gulf, was the Ottoman fleet, commanded by the experienced and respected Ali Pasha. The Ottoman fleet, though slightly smaller than that of the Holy League, was no less formidable. It consisted of over 250 ships, including galleys and galleasses, many of them manned by highly skilled sailors and soldiers. The Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of Sultan Selim II, had long dominated the Mediterranean, and its naval forces were considered among the best in the world. Ali Pasha himself was a veteran commander, known for his tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty to the Sultan. He had been given the responsibility of maintaining Ottoman supremacy in the Mediterranean, and he understood that the outcome of this battle would be critical to the empire's ambitions in the region. The Ottoman fleet was not merely a military force, but also a symbol of the empire's power and reach. The galleys were decorated with the colors and insignias of the Sultan, and their decks were crowded with soldiers ready to fight for their faith and empire. Among them were not only Turks, but also a diverse array of men from across the Ottoman Empire, including North Africans, Arabs, and Balkan Christians, many of whom had been conscripted or enslaved. The sight of the Holy League's fleet approaching must have filled them with a mix of resolve and anxiety as they prepared to face a coalition that had been formed specifically to challenge their dominance. As the Holy League fleet drew closer, the tactical situation began to take shape. Don John of Austria, aware of the strengths and weaknesses of both his fleet and that of the Ottomans, ordered his ships to form a crescent-shaped battle line, a formation designed to envelop the Ottoman forces and prevent them from executing their favored tactics of outflanking and boarding. At the center of this formation were the most powerful ships, including the flagship of Don John himself, the Real, a massive galley bristling with cannons and manned by some of the best soldiers in the fleet. The Venetian contingent under the command of Agostino Barbarigo formed the left wing, while the Spanish and other allied forces made up the right wing, commanded by Giovanni Andrea Doria. The Holy League's plan was simple yet bold: engage the Ottomans directly and use their superior firepower and discipline to break the enemy's line. The galleasses, heavily armed ships that were slower but more stable, were positioned at the front of the formation to act as floating gun platforms, intended to soften the Ottoman lines before the galleys moved in for the kill. Don John knew that the key to victory would be to hold the line and prevent the Ottomans from exploiting any gaps in the formation, a challenge that required not just courage but also precise coordination among the various commanders. As the two fleets closed the distance, the tension on both sides became almost unbearable. The Ottoman ships, recognizing the threat posed by the approaching Holy League fleet, began to adjust their positions, with Ali Pasha ordering his forces to prepare for battle. The Ottoman fleet also formed a crescent, mirroring the Holy League's formation, with Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana, at the center. The air was filled with the sound of drums and war cries as the Ottoman soldiers prepared themselves for the coming fight. The banners of the Sultan waved proudly over the fleet, and the men aboard the ships shouted prayers to Allah, seeking victory and glory in battle. The moment of contact was fast approaching, and both sides knew that the outcome of this battle would have far-reaching consequences. For the Holy League, a victory would not only protect Europe from further Ottoman expansion, but also deliver a powerful message about the strength and unity of Christian Europe. For the Ottomans, victory would solidify their control over the Mediterranean and reinforce their reputation as the dominant power in the region. The stage was set for a clash of civilizations, and the men on both sides steeled themselves for what was to come. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the Gulf, the first cannon shots rang out, signaling the start of the battle. The galleasses of the Holy League unleashed devastating broadsides, their cannons roaring as they fired into the advancing Ottoman ships. The water around the Ottoman fleet erupted in plumes of spray and smoke as cannonballs tore through wood and flesh, sending splinters and debris flying in all directions. Despite the onslaught, the Ottoman fleet pressed forward, closing the distance between the two forces and preparing to engage in the brutal and bloody close-quarters combat that would soon follow. The battle that unfolded over the next several hours would be one of the most intense and ferocious naval engagements of the 16th century. The men aboard the ships fought with a determination born of desperation and faith, knowing that the outcome of this battle would shape the future of the Mediterranean and the fate of their respective empires. As the Holy League and Ottoman fleets clashed, the waters of the Gulf of Patras turned red with blood, and the air was filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of steel, the crack of muskets, and the cries of the wounded and dying. The early morning of October 7, 1571, would be remembered as the beginning of the Battle of Lepanto, a confrontation that would become legendary in the annals of history.
As the morning of October 7, 1571, progressed and the first light of dawn gave way to the warm glow of mid-morning, the Gulf of Patras became a cauldron of mounting tension and impending violence. The two massive fleets, the Holy League on one side and the Ottoman Empire on the other, maneuvered cautiously, each commander carefully considering his next move, fully aware that a single mistake could mean disaster. The Holy League fleet, under the command of Don John of Austria, had been advancing steadily since early dawn, and now, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, the moment of reckoning was drawing near. The fleet had sailed through the straits into the wide expanse of the Gulf, its hundreds of galleys cutting through the still, clear waters. The morning mist had lifted, revealing the full scale of the opposing forces. Ahead of them lay the vast Ottoman fleet, a formidable armada under the command of the experienced and battle-hardened Ali Pasha, who had been entrusted by Sultan Selim II with the task of crushing this audacious Christian coalition. Don John of Austria, a commander both young and determined, knew that the coming hours would be critical. His fleet was a powerful one, but he was well aware of the challenges ahead. The Ottomans held a numerical advantage, particularly in terms of the number of smaller, more maneuverable vessels that could be used to swarm and overwhelm larger galleys. To counter this, Don John had carefully planned his fleet's formation, seeking to neutralize the numerical superiority of the Ottomans with a strategic deployment that would maximize the strengths of his own forces. As the two fleets continued to close the distance, Don John ordered his ships to begin forming a crescent-shaped line of battle. This was a bold and calculated move designed to envelop the Ottoman forces and prevent them from exploiting their numerical advantage by outflanking the Holy League ships. The crescent formation, with its gently curving arc, allowed each ship to support its neighbors, creating a continuous front that would be difficult for the Ottomans to penetrate. It was a formation that required discipline, coordination, and precise timing, all of which Don John was confident his commanders and crews could deliver. At the center of the crescent, Don John positioned his flagship, the Real, a massive and imposing galley that symbolized the power and resolve of the Holy League. Flanked by other large and heavily armed galleys, including those of the Papal States and the Kingdom of Naples, the center was designed to be the anchor of the formation, where the heaviest fighting would likely occur. Don John himself, clad in armor and armed with a sword that had been blessed by the Pope, stood on the deck of the Real, surveying the scene with a calm yet focused demeanor. He knew that as the commander, his presence at the heart of the battle would inspire his men and signal to them that he was prepared to share in the dangers they would soon face. To the left of the center, the Venetian contingent, led by Agostino Barbarigo, took up their positions. The Venetians, seasoned sailors with centuries of experience in Mediterranean warfare, were a crucial part of the Holy League's strength. Barbarigo's ships were positioned to hold the left flank, tasked with preventing the Ottomans from circling around and attacking the Holy League from the side. The Venetians were especially motivated, given their recent loss of Cyprus to the Ottomans, and they were eager to reclaim their honor and strike a blow against the empire that had taken so much from them. On the right flank, the Spanish and Genoese forces, commanded by Giovanni Andrea Doria, a seasoned admiral known for his tactical brilliance, formed the other arm of the crescent. Doria's role was equally vital, to protect the fleet's right side from being outflanked and to maintain the integrity of the crescent formation. His ships were a mix of Spanish and Italian galleys, well-armed and manned by experienced crews. Doria's position at the right wing was a strategic choice, reflecting both his experience and the importance of maintaining a strong and flexible defense. Further behind the main line, the Holy League's galleasses, large and heavily armed vessels that were slower than the galleys but packed a significant punch with their numerous cannons, were strategically placed to act as floating fortresses. These ships would serve as artillery platforms, capable of firing over the heads of the advancing galleys and into the heart of the Ottoman formation. Their firepower was intended to disrupt and weaken the enemy before the galleys closed in for the melee that was sure to follow. The galleasses were a relatively new addition to naval warfare, and their role in the upcoming battle was seen as crucial, potentially giving the Holy League a technological edge over the more traditional Ottoman fleet. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, Ali Pasha was also making his preparations. The Ottoman fleet, which had been advancing toward the Holy League, was now spreading out into its own battle formation, designed to meet and counter the Christian forces. Ali Pasha was well aware of the Holy League's strategy and was preparing to use the Ottoman fleet's superior numbers and agility to his advantage. He ordered his ships into a broad crescent, mirroring the formation of the Holy League, but with key differences that he hoped would exploit any weaknesses in the Christian line. At the center of the Ottoman formation was Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana, a grand and imposing vessel that, like the Real, served as both a symbol of command and a focal point for the battle.
As the morning sun climbed toward its zenith on October 7, 1571, the Gulf of Patras was a scene of controlled chaos. The Holy League and Ottoman fleets had maneuvered into their respective positions, each commander making last-minute adjustments to their formations as they prepared for the inevitable clash. The tension was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on the thousands of men aboard the ships, many of whom had spent the last hours in fervent prayer, steeling themselves for the brutal combat that lay ahead. The waters between the two fleets seemed to shimmer with anticipation, as if the sea itself held its breath in anticipation of the coming violence. The Holy League's crescent-shaped formation, designed by Don John of Austria to maximize the coalition's firepower and cohesion, was now fully in place. The fleet's center, where the largest and most powerful galleys were positioned, bore the brunt of the coming battle. This was where Don John's flagship, the Real, stood ready, flanked by the might of the papal and Spanish ships, their decks crowded with soldiers eager for the fight. Opposite them, the Ottoman fleet had also formed a crescent, with Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana, at the center. The Ottomans, seasoned in the art of naval warfare, were prepared to exploit any weakness in the Holy League's lines, using their numerical advantage and the agility of their ships to outmaneuver the Christian forces. Pasha, experienced and confident, knew that the outcome of this battle would determine the fate of the Mediterranean and the security of the Ottoman Empire's western territories. As the fleets closed in on one another, the distance between them shrinking with each passing minute, the quiet of the morning was shattered by the thunder of cannon fire. The first shots came from the Holy League's galleasses, their massive guns booming as they unleashed a deadly barrage into the advancing Ottoman ships. These initial volleys were intended to disrupt the Ottoman formation, to break their momentum before the galleys engaged in close combat. Cannonballs whistled through the air, splintering wood and tearing through sails, sending plumes of smoke and spray into the sky. Despite the damage inflicted, the Ottoman fleet pressed forward, undeterred, their drums beating a steady rhythm that echoed across the water. Then, with a sudden, ferocious burst of speed, the two centers collided. The galleys of the Holy League and the Ottomans slammed into each other with a force that shook the very timbers of the ships. The sound of wood crashing against wood, the clatter of grappling hooks being thrown, and the shouts of commanders filled the air as the battle began in earnest. The decks of the galleys, which just moments before had been relatively calm, now erupted into chaos as soldiers poured onto the enemy ships, swords drawn, ready to engage in hand-to-hand combat. The decks of the galleys, which just moments before had been relatively calm, now erupted into chaos as soldiers poured onto the enemy ships, swords drawn, ready to engage in hand-to-hand combat. On the deck of the Real, Don John of Austria, resplendent in his armor, led his men with unwavering resolve. The Real had struck directly into the heart of the Ottoman line, seeking to engage the Sultana itself. Around him, the elite soldiers of the Spanish tercios, renowned for their discipline and ferocity in battle, fought with grim determination. They were met by the equally fierce janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman Empire, who had boarded the Real from the Sultana in a desperate attempt to capture the flagship and turn the tide of battle in their favor. The fighting on the deck of the Real was intense and brutal, with no quarter given by either side. The narrow confines of the ship meant that the combat was up close and personal, with swords, axes, and pikes wielded in a deadly dance of thrusts and parries. The air was thick with the sounds of clashing steel, the cries of the wounded, and the shouts of officers urging their men on. Blood flowed freely across the decks, turning the wooden planks slick and treacherous underfoot. Don John, despite the chaos around him, remained a figure of calm and determination. He moved through the melee with purpose, directing his men, rallying those who faltered, and striking down any Ottoman who came within reach. His presence on the battlefield served as a beacon of hope for the Holy League's forces, a reminder that their leader was with them, sharing in the same dangers, fighting for the same cause. The Sultana, Ali Pasha's flagship, was also a scene of intense combat. Ali Pasha, understanding the symbolic importance of this battle between the two flagships, had committed his best soldiers to the fight. The Ottoman commander himself was a picture of resolve, issuing orders with a steady hand even as the battle raged around him. The janissaries, his elite troops, fought with a fanatical zeal, determined to overpower the Christian forces and bring glory to the Sultan. The struggle between the Sultana and the Real became the focal point of the battle, with both sides recognizing that whoever controlled these ships could well control the outcome of the entire engagement. Elsewhere in the center of the battle, similar scenes of carnage played out as the galleys of the Holy League and the Ottomans became entangled in a deadly embrace. The Venetians, under the command of Agostino Barbarigo, fought tenaciously on their ships, their sailors and soldiers displaying the same courage and determination that had marked Venice as a maritime power for centuries. Barbarigo himself was in the thick of the fighting, directing his men from the front, his voice carrying above the din of battle as he urged them to hold the line and push the Ottomans back. On the right wing of the Holy League's formation, Giovanni Andrea Doria's forces were also heavily engaged. Doria, an experienced and shrewd commander, had anticipated the Ottoman tactics and was working to prevent them from outflanking the Holy League's position. His ships were locked in fierce combat with the Ottoman vessels, their decks a swirl of movement and violence as men grappled with each other, fighting not just for victory but for survival. The battle's intensity only increased as the morning wore on. With each passing minute, more ships joined the fray, their crews hurling themselves into the combat with reckless abandon. The sea between the two fleets became a graveyard of splintered wood, torn sails and bodies, as ships that had been damaged or sunk in the initial clash drifted aimlessly or sank beneath the waves. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung heavy in the air, mingling with the salty tang of the sea, creating an atmosphere that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the combat in the center reached its peak, it became clear that this was no ordinary battle. This was a struggle not just between two fleets, but between two civilizations, two faiths, each determined to assert its dominance over the Mediterranean. The men fighting on the decks of the galleys knew that they were part of something far larger than themselves, a confrontation that would be remembered for generations to come. By late morning, the battle had settled into a grim and bloody stalemate in the center. Neither side was willing to give an inch, and the decks of the galleys were littered with the dead and dying. Yet, despite the horrific losses, both the Holy League and the Ottomans fought on with undiminished ferocity. The fate of the Mediterranean, and perhaps of Europe itself, hung in the balance, and neither side was prepared to concede defeat. The clash between the Real and the Sultana raged on, emblematic of the larger struggle, as Don John and Ali Pasha each sought to outlast and outfight the other in a battle that would echo through history.
As the sun climbed high into the afternoon sky on October 7, 1571, the battle in the Gulf of Patras raged on with undiminished ferocity. The morning had been a brutal contest of wills, with both the Holy League and the Ottoman Empire throwing the full weight of their forces into the struggle. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the cries of the wounded, and the unrelenting clash of steel on steel. The sea, once calm and clear, was now churned into a froth, stained red with the blood of the fallen and littered with the wreckage of shattered ships. Despite the intensity of the battle, the Holy League, under the command of Don John of Austria, had managed to maintain the integrity of its formation. The crescent-shaped line that had been so carefully crafted earlier in the day still held, although it was battered and bloodied from hours of fierce combat. The galleys at the center of the Holy League's line, where Don John's flagship Real continued to engage the Ottoman flagship Sultana, were locked in a deadly struggle that had come to symbolize the battle as a whole. However, as the battle stretched into the afternoon, subtle but significant shifts began to occur. The superior firepower of the Holy League's galleasses, which had been strategically placed at the flanks and rear of the formation, began to make a decisive impact. These massive, heavily armed ships had been somewhat of a secret weapon for the Holy League. Equipped with numerous heavy cannons, they could deliver devastating broadsides that far outmatched the firepower of the smaller Ottoman galleys. Throughout the morning, the galleasses had been firing into the advancing Ottoman lines, but as the battle dragged on, their effect became more pronounced. The relentless bombardment from the galleasses began to take its toll on the Ottoman fleet. Ships that had previously seemed indomitable were now being reduced to splinters under the withering hail of cannon fire. The galleasses' elevated gun decks allowed them to fire over the heads of the Holy League's galleys, striking deep into the heart of the Ottoman formations. With each thunderous volley, more Ottoman ships were disabled, their hulls shattered, their decks torn apart by the sheer force of the blasts. The once cohesive Ottoman line began to show signs of disarray, as galleys attempted to maneuver out of the line of fire, only to find themselves trapped by the Holy League's advancing ships. Meanwhile, on the decks of the Holy League's galleys, the soldiers and sailors, inspired by the sight of their enemies faltering, redoubled their efforts. The Spanish tercios, with their disciplined ranks and unyielding resolve, pressed their advantage, pushing forward with grim determination. On the Venetian ships, the sailors and soldiers, driven by a fierce desire to avenge the loss of Cyprus, fought with renewed vigor. Agostino Barbarigo, despite suffering a grievous wound earlier in the battle, continued to lead his men with the same tenacity that had defined his command from the beginning. His determination was matched by the men under his command, who refused to yield an inch to the Ottoman forces. As the afternoon wore on, the momentum of the battle began to shift decisively in favor of the Holy League. The steady erosion of the Ottoman fleet's strength became increasingly apparent. Ships that had once been at the forefront of the battle were now drifting aimlessly, their crews dead or dying, their masts splintered, and their hulls riddled with cannonballs. The disciplined firepower of the Holy League, combined with their superior tactics and the experience of their commanders, began to tell. The Ottoman fleet, once a formidable force that had inspired fear throughout the Mediterranean, was now struggling to maintain cohesion. At the center of the battle, the clash between the Real and the Sultana reached a critical point. Don John of Austria, sensing that the tide of battle was turning, ordered his men to launch a final, decisive assault on the Ottoman flagship. With a cry of "Santiago!" the Spanish soldiers surged forward, boarding the Sultana in a desperate bid to capture the ship and bring the battle to a close. The fighting on the deck of the Sultana was ferocious, with neither side willing to give ground. The Janissaries, the elite troops of the Ottoman Empire, fought with their characteristic bravery, but they were slowly being overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught of the Holy League's forces. Ali Pasha, the Ottoman commander, knew that the fate of the battle, and perhaps the entire Mediterranean, depended on the outcome of this struggle. He fought with the desperation of a man who understood that defeat was not an option. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that the Holy League was gaining the upper hand. The Ottoman troops, demoralized by the steady disintegration of their fleet and the relentless pressure from the Holy League, began to falter. The decisive moment came when Ali Pasha himself was struck down. His death sent shockwaves through the Ottoman ranks, and the morale of the remaining Ottoman forces, already stretched to the breaking point, collapsed. The Sultana was overrun, and the banner of the Holy League was raised over the ship, signaling to the rest of the fleet that the Ottoman flagship had fallen. The sight of the Sultana in the hands of the enemy was the final blow to the Ottoman fleet's morale. With their commander dead and their flagship captured, the cohesion of the Ottoman fleet rapidly disintegrated. Ships that had been holding the line now broke off from the battle, attempting to flee the scene of their defeat. Some were captured by the Holy League's pursuing galleys, while others were sunk by the relentless cannon fire from the galleasses. The once proud Ottoman fleet, which had sailed into the Gulf of Patras with the expectation of victory, was now a shadow of its former self, its ships scattered and in disarray. Throughout the afternoon, the Holy League's forces continued to press their advantage. The galleys, emboldened by their success, moved through the remnants of the Ottoman fleet, capturing ships and rescuing Christian slaves who had been chained to the oars of the Ottoman vessels. The sight of these freed men, many of whom had been forced into slavery by the Ottomans, served as a powerful reminder of what was at stake in this battle. By late afternoon, it was clear that the Holy League had achieved a decisive victory. The Ottoman fleet, which had once threatened the very heart of Europe, lay in ruins. The sea was littered with the wreckage of ships, the bodies of the fallen, and the broken remnants of an empire's naval power. The battle, which had begun with such high stakes and such fierce determination on both sides, was now drawing to a close. The Holy League, through superior tactics, firepower, and the unyielding resolve of its commanders and crews, had turned the tide of the battle, and with it, the tide of history. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the surviving ships of the Holy League regrouped, their crews exhausted but jubilant. The battle had been won, and with it, a great threat to Christendom had been vanquished. The victory at Lepanto would be remembered as one of the most significant naval engagements in history, a triumph of unity and determination over seemingly insurmountable odds. For Don John of Austria and the men of the Holy League, the afternoon of October 7, 1571, would forever be etched in their memories as the moment when they had turned the tide of war and secured a place in the annals of history.
As the Battle of Lepanto dragged into the late afternoon on October 7, 1571, the tide had irrevocably turned in favor of the Holy League. The once mighty Ottoman fleet, which had sailed into the Gulf of Patras with such confidence, was now in a state of disarray. The relentless pressure from the Holy League's galleys, combined with the devastating firepower of their galleasses, had decimated the Ottoman ranks. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, mingling with the salty sea breeze, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. In the midst of this chaotic scene, the focal point of the battle remained the intense struggle between the flagships at the center of the fray. Don John of Austria's Real and Ali Pasha's Sultana had been locked in a deadly duel since the early morning, their decks stained with the blood of countless soldiers, their hulls battered and scorched from the ongoing combat. The clash between these two vessels had come to symbolize the broader struggle between Christendom and the Ottoman Empire, with the fate of the Mediterranean hanging in the balance. By late afternoon, the Sultana was in dire straits. The once proud Ottoman flagship, which had been the heart of the fleet, was now a battered wreck, its sails in tatters and its deck littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers. The relentless assault by the Holy League had taken its toll. Despite the valiant efforts of the Janissaries, the elite troops of the Ottoman Empire, who had fought with unyielding resolve, the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The Sultana was surrounded on all sides, hemmed in by the galleys of the Holy League, which were pressing their advantage with ruthless efficiency. On the deck of the Real, Don John of Austria, sensing that the moment of decision was at hand, ordered his men to prepare for a final, all-out assault on the Sultana. The Spanish commander knew that capturing the Ottoman flagship would be a blow from which the enemy might not recover, both tactically and psychologically. As the order was given, the soldiers of the Holy League surged forward with renewed energy, spurred on by the prospect of victory within their grasp. Grappling hooks were thrown, and the two flagships were drawn even closer together, their hulls grinding against one another as the men on board prepared to cross the narrow gap. Ali Pasha, the experienced and respected Ottoman commander, understood the gravity of the situation. From his position on the Sultana, he could see that his fleet was in disarray, with many ships either sunk or fleeing the battlefield. Yet he remained resolute, determined to fight to the last, knowing that the eyes of the Sultan and the entire empire were upon him. Ali Pasha rallied his remaining men, urging them to hold the line, to resist the Christian forces with every ounce of strength they had left. The Janissaries, loyal to their commander and fiercely dedicated to their cause, prepared to meet the Holy League's assault head-on. The final clash on the Sultana was a brutal and bloody affair, a desperate struggle fought in close quarters with no room for retreat. The soldiers of the Holy League, many of them hardened veterans, charged onto the Ottoman flagship with a ferocity born of hours of combat and the knowledge that victory was within reach. The fighting was intense, with swords clashing, muskets firing at point-blank range, and the screams of the wounded and dying filling the air. The narrow deck of the Sultana became a killing ground, with bodies piled high as both sides fought with a savage determination. In the midst of this chaotic melee, Ali Pasha stood firm, commanding his men with the same calm authority that had made him one of the Ottoman Empire's most respected leaders. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that the tide was turning against him. The Holy League soldiers, driven by their resolve to capture the Ottoman flagship, gradually began to overpower the remaining defenders. The Janissaries, despite their bravery, were being cut down, their ranks thinning with each passing moment. Then, in the heat of battle, the unthinkable happened. Ali Pasha, who had led his men with such courage and determination, was struck down. Accounts vary as to how he met his end. Some say he was felled by a musket shot, others that he was killed in hand-to-hand combat, but the result was the same. The Ottoman fleet had lost its commander. The death of Ali Pasha sent a shockwave through the ranks of the remaining Ottoman forces. The sight of their leader lying lifeless on the deck shattered the already fragile morale of the Ottoman troops. For the Holy League, however, Ali Pasha's death was a pivotal moment. The soldiers of the Real, spurred on by their commander's orders and the sight of their enemies in disarray, pressed the attack with renewed vigor. With Ali Pasha's fall, the resistance on the Sultana quickly crumbled. The remaining Janissaries, realizing that the battle was lost, either surrendered or were cut down as they attempted to flee. The Holy League soldiers swept through the ship, securing the deck and capturing the surviving Ottoman officers. The banner of the Holy League was raised over the Sultana, a visible symbol of their triumph that could be seen by both the retreating Ottoman fleet and the victorious forces of the Holy League. The capture of the Sultana and the death of Ali Pasha were the final blows to the Ottoman fleet's morale. The loss of their flagship, combined with the death of their commander, signaled to the remaining Ottoman ships that the battle was lost. Those ships that had not already been captured or sunk began to scatter, many attempting to flee the battlefield in a desperate bid to avoid the same fate. The once proud Ottoman fleet, which had sailed into the Gulf of Patras with such confidence, was now in full retreat, its ships broken and its crews demoralized. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the sea was littered with the wreckage of battle-shattered masts, broken oars, and the bodies of the fallen. The waters around the Sultana were stained red with blood, a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle that had been fought there. The Holy League, though blooded and exhausted, had emerged victorious. The capture of the Sultana and the death of Ali Pasha marked the definitive end of the battle, signaling to all that the Ottoman fleet had been decisively defeated. For Don John of Austria and the men of the Holy League, the capture of the Sultana was more than just a tactical victory, it was a moment of profound symbolic importance. The defeat of the Ottoman flagship, combined with the death of its commander, signified the end of the Ottoman threat in the Mediterranean, at least for the time being. The victory at Lepanto would be celebrated throughout Christendom as a triumph of unity and resolve over a formidable and feared enemy. As the light of day began to fade, the surviving ships of the Holy League began to regroup, their crews weary but triumphant. The Battle of Lepanto, one of the most significant naval engagements in history, was over. The Holy League's victory would echo through the centuries, a testament to the power of cooperation and the resolve of those who fought to defend their faith and their lands from the advancing forces of the Ottoman Empire. For the men who had fought and survived that day, the sight of the captured Sultana, with the banner of the Holy League fluttering in the evening breeze, would remain etched in their memories as the moment when they had turned the tide of history.
As the sun dipped below the horizon on October 7, 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, one of the largest and most significant naval engagements in history, finally drew to a close. The sky, streaked with the deep reds and purples of dusk, mirrored the blood-soaked waters of the Gulf of Patras, where the remnants of the Ottoman fleet now drifted aimlessly or sank beneath the waves. The once mighty armada of the Ottoman Empire, which had sailed with such confidence and power that morning, was now a shattered shadow of its former self. The sea was littered with the debris of battle, splintered masts, broken oars, and the bodies of thousands of men who had perished in the fierce combat. The Holy League, an alliance of Catholic states brought together by Pope Pius V to resist the Ottoman threat, had emerged from the battle victorious, though not unscathed. Their fleet, too, bore the scars of the day's savage fighting. Ships were battered, many of them barely seaworthy, their decks stained with blood and the bodies of the fallen. Yet, despite the heavy toll, the men of the Holy League were jubilant. They had faced the most formidable naval power of the age and had triumphed, securing a place in history and striking a powerful blow against the expansionist ambitions of the Ottoman Empire. As the evening settled in, the full scale of the Holy League's victory began to become apparent. The Ottoman fleet had been almost completely annihilated. Of the approximately 300 ships that had set sail under the banner of the crescent moon, nearly 200 had been lost, either captured, sunk, or burned beyond repair. The once dominant force that had terrorized the Mediterranean for decades was now reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Many of the ships that remained afloat were severely damaged and barely seaworthy, their crews demoralized and leaderless. The loss of life on the Ottoman side was staggering. Over 30,000 men had perished in the battle, a devastating blow to the empire's military power. The majority of these were soldiers and sailors who had been killed in the intense fighting, either on the decks of the galleys or in the water as they tried desperately to escape the wreckage of their ships. Many had also drowned, trapped below decks as their vessels sank, or were picked off by the Holy League's archers and musketeers as they attempted to swim to safety. The bodies of these men, some still clutching their weapons, now floated in the bloodied water, a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. In addition to the staggering loss of life, the Ottomans had also lost a significant number of their elite janissaries, the highly trained soldiers who had been the backbone of their military might. These troops, considered some of the finest in the world, had fought bravely but were overwhelmed by the sheer determination and superior tactics of the Holy League. Their loss would be keenly felt by the Ottoman Empire, not only as a military blow but also as a psychological one, as the invincible reputation of the janissaries was shattered on the bloody waters of Lepanto. The Holy League, though victorious, had also suffered significant casualties. Approximately 8,000 of their men had been killed, with many more wounded. The decks of their ships were littered with the dead and dying, men who had given their lives in the fierce struggle to repel the Ottoman advance. The survivors, though weary and bloodied, found a grim satisfaction in the knowledge that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The losses, while heavy, were far less than those of their enemies, a testament to the effectiveness of their tactics and the leadership of Don John of Austria. As night fell, the commanders of the Holy League began to take stock of their situation. Fires were lit on the decks of the ships to illuminate the scene, and the wounded were tended to as best as could be managed in the cramped and blood-soaked conditions. Priests moved among the men, offering last rites to the dying and comfort to the survivors. The mood among the fleet was one of somber triumph. Victory had been achieved, but at a great cost. The men who had fought so bravely now found themselves facing the grim task of tending to their fallen comrades and repairing their battle-damaged ships. Don John of Austria, the charismatic young commander of the Holy League, moved among his men, offering words of encouragement and praise. His leadership had been instrumental in securing the victory, and now, as the battle's echoes faded into the night, he was keenly aware of the significance of what had been achieved. The Holy League had not only repelled the Ottoman advance, but had dealt a blow from which the empire might never fully recover. The balance of power in the Mediterranean had been irrevocably shifted, and the threat of Ottoman domination of the sea had been, for the time being, extinguished. As the evening deepened into night, the surviving ships of the Holy League began to regroup. The once sprawling battlefield, now eerily quiet, except for the lapping of the waves and the crackle of burning ships, was a haunting reminder of the day's ferocity. The captured Ottoman vessels were inspected, their surviving crews taken as prisoners, and their holds searched for valuable intelligence. The Holy League's fleet, though diminished in numbers, was still largely intact, a testament to the skill and determination of its commanders and crews. Throughout the night, the victors worked tirelessly to salvage what they could from the battlefield. Ships were repaired where possible, and the dead were gathered for burial at sea. For many of the men, the events of the day would remain seared in their memories, a day of blood and fire, of desperate struggle and hard-won victory. The Battle of Lepanto had been a defining moment, not just for the men who had fought it, but for the history of Europe and the wider world. By the time dawn broke on the morning of October 8th, the scene in the Gulf of Patras had changed dramatically. The fires from the previous night had died down, leaving behind the charred remains of ships and the debris of battle. The waters, once churned by the fury of combat, were now calm, reflecting the morning sky. The Holy League's fleet, though battered, began to make preparations to sail back to their respective ports. Their mission had been accomplished, and the threat posed by the Ottoman Empire had been dealt a severe blow. The victory at Lepanto would be celebrated throughout Christendom as a turning point in the struggle against the Ottoman Empire. The news of the Holy League's triumph spread quickly, bringing with it a sense of relief and renewed hope. In cities and towns across Europe, bells rang out in celebration, and prayers of thanksgiving were offered for the victory that had been won at such a high cost. The Battle of Lepanto would be remembered as one of the greatest naval engagements in history, a triumph of determination, strategy, and faith against overwhelming odds. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat at Lepanto marked the beginning of the end of its dominance in the Mediterranean. Though the empire would remain a formidable power for centuries to come, its naval supremacy had been broken, and the myth of its invincibility shattered. The loss of so many ships and men, as well as the death of key leaders like Ali Pasha, would take years to recover from. The Battle of Lepanto was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological blow that would resonate throughout the empire and beyond. As the Holy League's fleet sailed away from the site of their victory, the men on board knew they had been part of something monumental. The Battle of Lepanto had been a day of great heroism and sacrifice, a day that would be remembered for generations to come as a defining moment in the history of Europe and the Mediterranean. The victory they had achieved would be celebrated, studied, and honored for centuries, a testament to the power of unity and the courage of those who fought in the face of overwhelming odds.
In 1572, the echoes of the Holy League's victory at Lepanto still reverberated across Europe, a continent that had been gripped by fear of Ottoman expansion for decades. The news of the stunning triumph spread like wildfire, igniting celebrations in cities, towns, and villages from Lisbon to Warsaw. For many, the victory was seen as a miraculous deliverance, a sign that divine providence had intervened to save Christendom from the looming threat of Ottoman domination. Churches were filled with worshippers offering prayers of thanksgiving, and in some regions, special masses were held to honor those who had fought and died in the battle. The victory was hailed not just as a military success, but as a spiritual triumph, a validation of the unity and resolve of the Christian states that had come together under the banner of the Holy League. The leaders of Europe were quick to recognize the significance of the victory. Pope Pius V, who had been instrumental in forming the Holy League, was particularly elated. He saw the victory as a vindication of his efforts to unite the fractious Christian powers against a common enemy. The Pope declared October 7th as a day of thanksgiving, which would later become the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, in honor of the Virgin Mary, whom he believed had interceded on behalf of the Christian forces. In Venice, the Doge and his counselors organized grand celebrations with processions, feasts, and the commissioning of new artworks to commemorate the event. In Spain, King Philip II, despite his somber and reserved nature, recognized the victory as a crucial moment in his reign, strengthening his position as the most powerful Catholic monarch in Europe. Yet, even as the celebrations continued, the leaders of the Holy League were faced with the sobering reality that their victory at Lepanto, while decisive, had not been as strategically crippling to the Ottoman Empire as they had hoped. The battle had certainly been a significant blow to Ottoman naval power, with the loss of so many ships and men, including many of their elite janissaries. However, the Ottomans, under the leadership of the capable Grand Vizier Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, were quick to begin the process of rebuilding their fleet. The Ottoman Empire, with its vast resources and well-established shipyards, was able to recover more quickly than the Holy League anticipated. In the months following Lepanto, reports began to filter back to Europe that the Ottomans were rebuilding their naval forces at an alarming rate. Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, a shrewd and experienced statesman, recognized that the loss at Lepanto, though damaging, was not insurmountable. He moved swiftly to restore the empire's naval strength, mobilizing resources from across the empire and pushing the empire's shipyards into overdrive. Thousands of workers toiled day and night to construct new galleys, and within a year, the Ottoman navy was once again a formidable force. This rapid recovery was a testament to the resilience and organizational capability of the Ottoman Empire, which had long demonstrated an ability to bounce back from setbacks. The Holy League, for all its success at Lepanto, struggled to maintain the unity and momentum needed to capitalize fully on the victory. The alliance that had come together so effectively under the pressure of imminent threat began to fray as soon as the immediate danger had passed. The individual members of the Holy League, Spain, Venice, the Papal States, and others, had different priorities and interests, and these began to pull them in different directions. Spain, under Philip II, was more focused on its interests in the Atlantic and the Netherlands, while Venice was primarily concerned with securing its trade routes and territories in the eastern Mediterranean. The Papal States, meanwhile, were limited by their relatively small military and economic power, and were reliant on the cooperation of the larger states. In Venice, where the loss of Cyprus to the Ottomans had been a major catalyst for joining the Holy League, the desire for immediate retribution was tempered by the realities of Venetian politics and economics. Venice was a trading republic, deeply dependent on its commercial relationships, many of which involved the Ottoman Empire. While the Venetian leadership had supported the Holy League and rejoiced in the victory at Lepanto, there was a growing recognition that a prolonged conflict with the Ottomans could be economically disastrous. As a result, Venice began to seek a way to negotiate a settlement with the Ottomans, aiming to protect its commercial interests, even as it celebrated its participation in the Holy League's victory. Spain, the most powerful member of the Holy League, was also hesitant to commit to further military campaigns in the eastern Mediterranean. King Philip II, though deeply committed to the Catholic cause, had to manage an empire that was vast and stretched across multiple continents. The costs of maintaining his armies and fleets were enormous, and Philip was constantly balancing the demands of war in the Netherlands, the defense of his American colonies, and the threat posed by England. While he understood the importance of the victory at Lepanto, he was not inclined to invest the resources necessary to launch a full-scale offensive against the Ottomans in the eastern Mediterranean. Instead, Spain focused on securing its own territories and supporting the Catholic cause in other parts of Europe. The papacy, under Pope Pius V, tried to keep the Holy League together, urging the member states to continue the fight against the Ottomans. However, without the military and economic power to back up its calls for action, the papacy found it difficult to maintain the cohesion of the alliance. The Pope's influence was significant, but it could not override the individual interests of the member states, each of which had its own agenda. The Holy League, which had been so effective in bringing together the diverse states of Europe to achieve a common goal, began to lose its sense of purpose as the immediate threat receded. Meanwhile, the Ottomans, under the guidance of Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, continued to rebuild their fleet and reassert their influence in the eastern Mediterranean. By 1572, the Ottomans had not only recovered from the loss at Lepanto, but were once again projecting power across the region. Their rapid recovery demonstrated the resilience of the Ottoman Empire and its ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The empire's strategic position in the eastern Mediterranean remained largely intact, and while the loss at Lepanto had been a setback, it had not fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region. As 1572 drew to a close, it became increasingly clear that the victory at Lepanto, while celebrated across Europe, had not delivered the knockout blow to the Ottoman Empire that many had hoped for. The Ottomans remained a formidable power, and their quick recovery underscored the limitations of the Holy League's success. The Battle of Lepanto had been a crucial moment in the struggle between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire, but it had not resolved the conflict. The Mediterranean would continue to be a contested space, with the Ottomans maintaining their influence in the east and the Christian states of Europe struggling to find a coherent and unified strategy to counter them. The legacy of Lepanto would endure, not just as a military victory, but as a symbol of what could be achieved when Europe's disparate powers united against a common threat. Yet, it also served as a reminder of the challenges of sustaining such unity in the face of competing interests and priorities. The failure to fully capitalize on the victory at Lepanto highlighted the difficulties of maintaining a coalition in the long term, especially when the immediate danger had passed. The Holy League's fleeting unity and the Ottomans' rapid recovery would set the stage for the continued struggle for control of the Mediterranean, a struggle that would persist for decades to come.
The Battle of Lepanto, fought on October 7, 1571, stands as one of the most monumental naval engagements in history, etched deeply into the annals of both European and Ottoman chronicles. The sheer scale of the battle, involving over 400 warships and nearly 150,000 men, made it an event of unprecedented magnitude. But beyond the numbers, Lepanto was a clash of civilizations, a pivotal moment in the long and bitter struggle between Christian Europe and the Muslim Ottoman Empire. The victory of the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states led by Spain, Venice, and the Papal States, was celebrated across Europe as a momentous triumph, a turning point that many believed would finally halt the seemingly unstoppable advance of the Ottoman Turks into the heart of Christendom. In the immediate aftermath, the victory at Lepanto was hailed as a miraculous and decisive blow to Ottoman power. The news was met with widespread jubilation, and in cities from Rome to Madrid, from Venice to Vienna, people rejoiced in the belief that a new era had dawned, an era where the threat of Ottoman expansion had been decisively checked. The image of Don John of Austria, the charismatic young commander of the Holy League fleet, became a symbol of Christian valor and divine favor. The poets, painters, and chroniclers of the time immortalized the battle, portraying it as a righteous struggle in which the forces of light triumphed over the forces of darkness. The victory was seen not merely as a military success, but as a vindication of the unity and resolve of the Christian powers. In the long term, however, the legacy of the Battle of Lepanto is more complex and nuanced than the immediate celebration suggested. While the battle did indeed mark a significant turning point in the history of the Mediterranean, it did not signal the end of the Ottoman threat, nor did it lead to the kind of sweeping victories over the empire that many in Europe had hoped for. The battle was a stunning success, but it was also, in many ways, a missed opportunity of victory that was not fully exploited by the Christian powers, allowing the Ottomans to regroup and continue to exert their influence in the eastern Mediterranean for centuries to come. Lepanto's long-term significance lies partly in its psychological impact. For decades, the Ottoman Empire had been seen as an unstoppable force, its armies and navies rolling back the frontiers of Christendom and spreading fear throughout Europe. The victory at Lepanto shattered this perception of invincibility. For the first time in a generation, the Christian powers had demonstrated that they could stand up to the Ottomans and prevail. This shift in perception was profound, giving Europe a renewed sense of confidence and a belief that the tide could be turned. The battle was a morale booster of the highest order, inspiring a generation of Europeans to believe in the possibility of resisting Ottoman expansion. Yet, while the victory at Lepanto halted Ottoman advances in the western Mediterranean, it did not fundamentally alter the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of the capable Grand Vizier Sakalu Mehmed Pasha, quickly recovered from the loss. Within a year, the Ottomans had rebuilt much of their navy, restoring their capacity to project power across the region. The strategic cities and ports of the eastern Mediterranean remained firmly in Ottoman hands, and their control over vital trade routes continued unchallenged. While the Christian powers might have won a significant battle, the Ottomans still held the upper hand in the broader conflict. The Holy League, despite its success at Lepanto, struggled to maintain the unity and momentum needed to capitalize on the victory. The coalition was a fragile alliance of states with differing agendas, and once the immediate threat had passed, the cracks began to show. Spain, Venice, and the Papal States each had their own priorities, and without the pressing need to confront an immediate Ottoman invasion, these priorities began to diverge. The lack of a concerted follow-up to Lepanto allowed the Ottomans to regroup and retain their dominance in the eastern Mediterranean, where they would continue to wield significant influence for centuries. Over time, the Battle of Lepanto took on a near-mythical status in European history. It was remembered as a glorious moment of unity, courage, and divine intervention, a battle where the forces of Christendom had come together to defeat a powerful and dangerous foe. The battle became a symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression, celebrated in art, literature, and religious ceremonies for centuries to come. The Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, established by Pope Pius V to commemorate the victory, became an enduring part of the Catholic liturgical calendar, ensuring that the memory of Lepanto would be passed down through generations. However, the Ottomans too remembered Lepanto, albeit in a different light. For the empire, the battle was a setback, but not a catastrophe. It was a harsh lesson in the dangers of complacency and the importance of maintaining naval supremacy, but it did not fundamentally weaken the empire's position in the eastern Mediterranean. The rapid rebuilding of the fleet and the continued dominance of the Ottomans in the region were testament to the resilience and adaptability of the empire. For centuries after Lepanto, the Ottomans continued to control key territories in the eastern Mediterranean, including Cyprus, Crete, and large parts of the Balkans, maintaining their status as a major power. In the long-term perspective, Lepanto can be seen as a crucial turning point that checked Ottoman expansion into the western Mediterranean, but did not signal the end of Ottoman power. The empire remained a dominant force in the eastern Mediterranean, influencing the politics, trade, and culture of the region for generations. The battle did not bring about the collapse of Ottoman power, as some in Europe had hoped, but it did alter the trajectory of the empire's expansion, forcing the Ottomans to refocus their efforts and reconsider their strategies. The legacy of Lepanto, therefore, is one of both triumph and limitation. It was a battle that demonstrated the power of unity and the possibility of resisting a formidable adversary, but it was also a reminder of the challenges of sustaining such unity in the face of complex and divergent interests. The battle marked a turning point in the long struggle between Christendom and the Ottoman Empire, but it was not the final chapter. The Mediterranean would remain a contested space, with the Ottomans continuing to play a central role in its history for centuries to come. In the end, the Battle of Lepanto is remembered as a moment of great significance, a clash of civilizations that shaped the course of history. It was a victory that halted Ottoman expansion into the western Mediterranean, a triumph that was celebrated across Europe and immortalized in art and literature. Yet it was also a victory that did not bring the definitive end to the Ottoman threat, leaving the empire's dominance in the eastern Mediterranean largely intact. The Battle of Lepanto stands as a testament to the complexity of history, where even the most decisive moments are often followed by a long and uncertain aftermath.